Everyone. Good to be here today. Love seeing all the faces, and as John called out, if you can, please turn your videos on, and we love to just see who's here and see everyone's faces. So thanks for joining. My name is Rachel Evans, for those who don't know me, and I'm based in South Africa. I just wanted to call out that we're coming from the end of a cohort from our course with Capital Institute, Introduction to Regenerative Economics. And we finished this course last week. We had a bonus session on Monday, and then it's kind of that course that never ends. And we're like, we need to have a mini workshop as well. So that was the intention of today. And then as it was building out, we're like, let's open this up to a broader community as well. So we've invited participants from the last cohorts to join. We also have people from nRhythm community who are maybe here for the first time thinking, what is the context of this? So just wanted to share that there are a lot of different holes and just networks coming together today. So thanks for joining us. All right, so why are we here? We're here to answer the question, why is regenerative leadership important within the context of living systems? So we're really going to explore and wrestle with that question today together. And yeah, thanks for being here. The flow is going to be a little bit of, we're going to go into what we call a discovery dialogue or a fireside chat with John Fullerton and Sara van Rensburg. And once that'll be about 30 minutes, then we'll jump into a breakout room with some questions and really be able to workshop it. So we'll pull up our sleeves a little bit and have some time to really workshop with questions and be able to connect with others as well. So on that, I would love to invite John and Sara up onto the stage, if we had a stage, or up to the front. But John comes from a background in finance and is really leading the Capital Institute quest on regenerative economics. And Sara, she's our firecracker in nRhythm and just such an incredible leader within the space of leadership. So really excited to have them both here today with all the communities. It feels like families coming together, extended families. So thanks everyone for being here. John, you ready for this? Sara?
Yeah. Great, thanks, Rachel, and I guess I'll serve as our host here. So let me also welcome Sara to the group here. There's something weird going on with my Zoom, so I can barely see anyone. I hope, can everyone hear me and see me okay?
Yes. Okay.
I'm looking at a bunch of blank squares, so if I stumble, I apologize. Just to expand a little bit on the context, you know, as Rachel just mentioned, we just completed our course on regenerative economics. And the basis, for those of you that are new to this, the basis of that is that we need to shift from the modern age, mechanistic, reductionistic logic of the machine age to an understanding that life is regenerative and that the economy and organizations within the economy are also living systems. People are living systems. And it stands to reason that if that premise is true, then leadership needs to be rethought as well and aligned with the patterns and principles of how living systems actually work rather than the patterns and principles of how machines work, which is essentially the conventional management approach. So that's the context of the dialogue that Sara and I are going to have today. And I should say up front that Sara has had much more experience coaching and working with leaders than I have. So I'm delighted to have a genuine expert joining me in this conversation today. So again, Sara, thanks for coming.
Thanks, John. Excited to be here.
So maybe let me just start with your experience, Sara, working with leaders. What is the are there common struggles, if you were to sort of generalize, about the patterns that you see leaders wrestling with?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I think one of the most significant ways that I have seen leaders struggle in the past and even today and have dealt with myself is dealing with the pressure to perform. I mean, we are expected to produce financial results, key performance indicators, outcomes, no matter what happens. It doesn't matter if there's a global pandemic, we still have to perform. And our roles are traditionally just completely centered around how do I get people to perform this intended action? And when we also care about people, our community, the planet, our own well-being, systems change, it can be a huge struggle and burden to be able to reconcile the difference between that push to deliver results and then genuinely caring about people. And I find that reconciling that can be an enormous weight for the leader. How have you experienced these kinds of pressures?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, just even the language you use, we refer to it as results-oriented leadership. And management by objective, all of these terms that we don't question, we accept are part of it. I guess, you know, well, certainly I've experienced the you know, back when I was a business manager, the pressure for results in the context of a Wall Street firm are enormous, and a lot riding on the line, and a lot of fear and risk if one doesn't deliver. Definitely not healthy for one's inner self. But I think the challenge to reconcile that with any sense of health is simply, you know, in my experience, again, on Wall Street, is simply ignored and pushed to the side as a topic for some other expert or department or your shrink or your family or someone, but it's not even there is no, well, again, I'm years out of that world. Maybe it's changed, but there generally is no reference to that struggle. It's just suck it up and deliver.
Oh yeah, I remember having these debates with my shareholders back when I was a CEO and arguing, wait a minute, we have to take care of people. And the constant push was, well, wait a minute, we have to reach the goals. And I felt like I was constantly at odds. I think though that this requires a different paradigm and something else to look at, because I don't think it can be reconciled by looking at, here's my pressure, here's what I care about with people, and then trying to make those balance. I don't think that's a healthy approach. And so instead of fixing problems and people issues and influencing behaviors that are in the way of performance, which is what we're really encouraged to do, I think it really becomes, what are the conditions that exist that have created this challenge to emerge? So if someone's not getting their work done and they're not performing, we look more than just at, well, are they motivated to do their job and how can I increase their motivation? And we notice other
do they need a raise?
Like, yeah, exactly. Let's incentivize them with more money. And we look at things like, do they have the information that they need to make decisions? Or how's their well-being? Or do they understand our purpose and strategies? Do they believe in them? Things like, is communication flowing or not flowing through the organization? And when we consider all the conditions that exist that make that issue, that challenge emerge, now we can deal with the conditions as a whole instead of just trying to fix the person or the problem. And I think that steps us out of that juxtaposition and allows us to put our focus on something else.
I mean, when I hear you talking, Sarah, it seems to me that there's a useful metaphor might be, you know, an athlete, and you know, we expect athletes to perform and to deliver, but athletes who are successful, or at least successful over the long run, know that the first and most important thing they need to do is take care of their health and their body and their emotional and physical well-being in order to perform at their maximum output. And yet in the context of, so that's in the context of a living system called the human body.
Right.
And yet in the context of a living system called a human organization that's in business or in government or anything else, we don't seem to focus on nutrition and weight training and mental health and all these other conditions. As you say, we just focus on the end goal and results-based performance. Is that a fair analogy?
I think that's spot on. And you're making me realize too. So Trey Cates, who's, I understand he did the Firms of the Future talk for the Intro to Regenerative Organizations a little bit ago. And he's a founder of nRhythm. And he talks about this time where he was taken onto a piece of land and they were touring it, looking at some of the dry, cracked ground. And there was a weed there. And his mentor said, what do you think created the conditions for that weed to emerge? And we're so busy trying to get rid of the weeds, extract the problems that are in the way, that we don't actually think there's a very good reason why the weed is there in the first place, because we created the conditions for them to emerge. So I just think the conversation has to change completely, and we have to value all those. It's more like early indicators as opposed to just that one performance metric.
Right. Which raises the question of how to even think about KPIs.
Right.
And the whole, if you again grow out to 30,000 feet for a second, we've come up with the SDGs, and we've come up with, now our favorite goal is net zero 2050, which
Right.
I think is the most ridiculous goal in the world, but that's a different conversation. But we focus on goals as if just by declaring a goal, we're going to generate that deliverable, because if we're in this mechanistic, we can only manage what we can measure. So if we measure it, we'll deliver it. And yet all of that avoids, again, to use my metaphor, the conversation about what nutrition do I need in order to deliver my maximum potential over a long period of time, and what weight training do I need to do, and what mental health support do I need in order to achieve that. That frame doesn't exist in typical management. Well, I'm being a little bit unfair, but it certainly isn't emphasized in a conventional management or leadership approach.
I don't think it's often addressed at a systemic level too. This reality that if we're pushing for goals, does it matter if our team members actually sleep? Does it matter if they have well-being at all? Does it matter as long as the goal is achieved? And sometimes the answer to that question is sadly no, and we don't even celebrate the important work that's being done because the next goal is barreling down. And it's a great way to live.
But also, to push back a little bit, this is a little bit naive about, the reality of a brutally competitive world out there, and businesses go through different cycles where, if you don't sleep all night and eat pizza, you may be bankrupt by the time morning comes and you've done your workout and your nutrition. So how do we, it's not a static thing. There's a flow between different forms of leadership required. I assume you would think, right?
I do. And I think it goes back to creating conditions, because we're not talking about creating conditions for well-being only. Like, let's make sure everybody's happy, they get to take naps during the day. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about creating conditions for a purpose to be understood and shared by everyone inside the organization, and for every team member to be a part of co-creating that, and to be decision makers, and to look at all the things that are in the way of the potential. Because if we consider every single person in our organization as having unrealized potential, and now our role is to create conditions to unleash that towards the goals, towards the work of the organization in a way that is healthy, it is possible that more could emerge than we actually planned in that goal. But we're not even thinking about that larger picture of emergence when we're just focused and obsessing over a goal.
So there's no kind of lost intensity about this approach. It's just a more holistic approach to quote unquote success. Let me switch topics for a second, because when we were preparing for this, you mentioned in your experience there were I think you said there were two common traits that you noticed in leaders that were kind of getting in their way. If you sort of put your leadership shrink hat on, or psychiatrist hat on, what were those? What were the two? What were the two issues?
Yeah, the two ends of the spectrum I often see is, on one side, and afraid of their own power, really just having so much strength and passion and drive towards the goals. And so they oscillate between being in fully out front and then pulling back. And it creates confusion for their team and hesitancy. Like, can I actually contribute? Because there's this pendulum swing constantly happening of I'm comfortable in my own skin and my strength, and I'm not. And the other is imposter syndrome, that feeling of like, who am I to be here doing this work? And the reality is most of us feel that way sometimes, but that pattern gets in the way because we doubt, we self-deprecate. It can undermine all the beautiful work we're trying to do. And we can also inadvertently teach our teams to hold back too and to hesitate. Have you had any of those come up in your career?
Yeah, they both resonate. I'm remembering what you had shared earlier. I mean, when I was in banking, one of the things that they kind of had me labeled as a leader manager, young manager. So I got moved around to different departments fairly frequently. And so I'd show up as the new boss who's supposed to have all the answers. And so I would feel like it was on my shoulders to come up with the brand new master strategy and then, sell it to the team who were all waiting eagerly for Mr. Wonderful to show up and tell them about the business that they'd been in longer than I had by far. And so I quickly went from this, afraid of power to, oh my God, why am I the boss of this group? Insecurity. And I think I don't know, I don't feel like I was a particularly effective leader. And mostly I think because there was no reference to creating the conditions for health. It was all about delivering performance and the ego-driven, competitive-driven. If I don't do this, someone else will, and they'll get the promotion. It was all about the definition of success, and the business was sort of a vehicle to achieve personal success. And I didn't really realize it at the time, but I think that's what it was. But I tell you, the other thing that resonates about your imposter syndrome aspect, there's a little statue sitting behind me, which my wife gave me when I was early in my sort of search for the response I was going to have to discovering that economics is bankrupt and with catastrophic consequences. And I felt I had the weight of the world on my shoulders because I had discovered this secret and I had to explain it to people. And she gave me that little statue that she found in some junk shop as a reminder that it wasn't really on my shoulders. And so it gave me great comfort to be relieved of that burden, if you will. And so but I probably was, who am I to question neoclassical economics that's been around and is the basis of our entire economy was very much an imposter syndrome fear that I had for a while.
Yeah.
How about you?
Go with those when we recognize how they impact people. I've always been incredibly driven, passionate. I would get so excited about an idea that I would get my teeth in it and run 100 miles an hour and think, okay, I've lost every single person. But I was so enthusiastic. I couldn't help myself. But what I came to realize is that that push pull was causing my team to have complete whiplash. And I had to really think hard, how can I let that be good? And one thing that you said that I think is really important here is this idea, do we have to be the ones to figure everything out and then go bring it back to our teams? Both of us in our stories have experienced that pressure. I have to be the one to solve this and then bring everyone with me. And in my journey, the solution was to be honest with my team about that and say, hey, here's who I am. Here's why I'm doing this. Here's how I see it affecting you. I don't know how to do this differently. Could you help me figure this out? And I think when we invite people into the problems with us and we don't know together, it opens up a lot more potential and it unleashes other people to want to be a part of the solution.
Yeah, I remember saying those words, but if I'm honest, I was being politically correct or whatever, but I actually thought I knew better. And so there's a challenge to being authentic in doing that, I think. But you'd also, when we talked about this before, you said something interesting, that you connected this with the separation, the fundamental issue of shifting from a mechanistic worldview to a living systems worldview is this notion of the myth of separation, and somehow you connected this issue to that. And can you explain that for us all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this in many ways is a symptom of our disconnection from others and our separateness, because when we feel separated and disconnected,
Which is both
of them. Yes, both of
Okay.
them. And even the push to drive performance, because when we're so focused on, like when we're disconnected from others, it leads us to overly focus on ourselves and how we are being perceived and what's important to us. And we don't recognize our need for others. I actually have an example about this, because I remember at one point I owned a technology consulting company, and the techs were constantly calling me and asking me, what should we do about this customer? What should we do about that? And I would be furious. I'm like, can't you just figure this out yourself? And it was becoming this like angst, like, really, is this so hard? And so I was talking to my coach about it and lamenting. I must have rambled for quite a while. And then he says, what would someone have to believe to resist being needed? And I thought, and I just tossed out some ideas. And finally I said, they'd have to think they don't need anyone. And the moment that came out of my mouth, I knew that was exactly my problem. I did not see my need for other people. So I was resisting their needing me. And when we fear our own power and we're oscillating between being too strong or too pulled back, or we think, who am I? If we just recognize our connection to other people and our holism, and the fact that we are all in this together, our role as the leader diminishes and it becomes we.
Yeah.
And now we can be ourselves completely in a much more healthy way.
That's great. I that resonates so strongly. I absolutely had that same experience in my former life. I remember I used to say to people, being a manager, I felt like my office had a sign on it that said problem department.
Right.
And people would just line up and bring me their problems. And I was so frustrated that I was like, can't you just figure this out without me?
Yeah.
And then the flip side has happened through this course experience where I think, and I hope I genuinely showed up not having those feelings of I have the answers. And it's amazing how much I've learned from the course participants. And in fact, things, people have sent me books, ideas that are now part of the curriculum. So it is and that's, I could point to specific examples. That's literally true. And so there's no question that the course is a evolving, emergent phenomenon that is benefiting from the collective intelligence that shows up. So that all makes great sense to me. What do we do to help people get past these, other than send everyone to their psychologist and have them work on their egos? What else? Do you have any ideas on tools, or how do we put this into work in our own lives as leaders? And by the way, I should have started by saying one of the premises of the whole regenerative paradigm is that the boss paradigm, hierarchical approach to leadership is out the window, and that literally everyone needs to show up into their lives as a leader. And in fact, the criteria for leadership in the context of this incredibly complex world we live in today, and the shift from mechanistic thinking to holistic thinking, this is not the job for a single hero. This is a collective endeavor. I talk about in the course a framework that I learned again from someone else recently, but different archetypes of leadership and the need for growing wisdom within the leadership, the collective leadership. But I'm sure you have some sort of tricks or first steps that can help people land this in a concrete way in their daily lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think first and foremost, it has to start with our ability to design our own roles so we can thrive. Because if we are drowning and stressed, we have no margin, we are not bringing our genius forward into the work, we can't actually help other people realize their potential. I think that we need to start with ourselves and then be willing to address what's in the way for us and address the ways that mechanistic thinking is showing up in our lives, because it is likely it's showing up somewhere for every single one of us. And with that kind of foundation, then we can start to look at the conditions that are being created. And honestly, I truly believe if we put most of our attention on that, we can make an enormous impact in our organizations. And I think the other piece here is that if we look through the patterns of living systems, that gives us a new way to reframe our mindsets. For example, if I believe in holism, I'm going to see my environment differently. I'm going to think different as a leader. I'll feel differently about the people on my team and the community and the people I serve. And so therefore I'll behave differently and I'll show up differently in my role. So I think those three things of learning to thrive ourselves, addressing what's in the way and how mechanistic thinking is affecting us and creating conditions can be done by looking through the lenses of living systems to help us see what's a new way that I could actually go about this.
The first piece you said of sort of learning, know thyself, what's our unique genius to contribute. What if that doesn't happen to match up with the job description that our mechanistic boss hands us? Then what do we do?
That is a really big question. I could probably talk about it for, an hour, just that one question. But I think a lot of times we see our unique genius as role-based. Like my genius is to, be a manager. My genius is to be a programmer. My genius is this or that. And I see genius as differently. It's a lens that we bring to the things we do. For example, I have a need for everything I do to be intentional. It's part of my genius. It's inescapable and it shows up in everything I do. Even if I'm just talking to the kids about their homework, literally, I will bring intention into even that. And I think if we can grasp what is that lens we bring to the world now, whatever role we're in, we can actually find ways to bring it to life and to lean on it in ways that give us more energy than if we're trying to pretend to be someone we're not.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question. It's my favorite.
And that authenticity is an attractor. I always like to say that a leader is someone that has people following them more than anything else. And if one is authentic in whatever role, it tends to be an attractor to other people. So that makes total sense. So I know we want to move into our breakout groups. Let me ask you to reflect on one last question. Very basic, but how would you define or describe a regenerative leader extraordinaire? What does that look like?
I think traditional leadership always has some element of our ability to influence and guide followers, but regenerative leadership is the ability to create conditions for people to thrive and to be intelligent decision makers. Not intelligent meaning high IQ, intelligent meaning aligned decisions that fit the purpose of the organization and that help bring that to life. If we can create conditions for people to thrive as intelligent decision makers, all of the potential in the organization begins to be realized. And I mean, if each one of us just imagined what would happen if the people in our organizations realized even a fraction of the potential in them towards our organization's purpose, I think we know why there's so much potential in that.
Beautiful. And that really, for those who have taken the Kaplan Institute course on regenerative economics, that beautifully ties it together. The premise of the 8 principles is that those are the kind of, my best way to describe universal first principles of how healthy living systems work applied to an economy. And so you could think about, aligning with those principles as creating conditions for a healthy economy. Absolutely. And out of that comes regenerative potential. So what you just said, Sarah, is dropping that down into an organization, and a leader who is responsible for creating the health in the organization is more fundamentally important than what we typically think about as leadership. And in a sense, it's a bet on emergence. It's a bet on regenerative potential emerging out of that healthy system. Just like going back to my athlete example, if you want to be a great athlete, you're making a bet that if you get the right nutrition, get the right sleep, do the right exercise, do the right training, that a potential will emerge out of you that you and others probably didn't expect or anticipate you even had at the beginning. And that's the distinction between this living systems paradigm and a mechanistic paradigm. In a mechanistic paradigm, there's a very clear determined goal in advance and a series of inputs and a mechanistic process that we think is going to deliver that goal or that outcome we set in advance. And the magic of life is that the goals aren't set in advance. The potential emerges that's beyond our wildest imagination.
Yeah, and I think this model is liberating because we're no longer having to drive at all costs towards these outcomes. And now we're creating conditions for even more abundance to emerge. So,
Right.
Yeah,
And
in
it
the
feels good.
letting go, there is a far greater gain, I think.
Yeah, you just have to be able to, if you happen to run a public company, you have to convince your shareholders on a quarterly basis that it's working, which is no small feat.
No.
I think we have to acknowledge. So,
Very true.
Rachel, I think we're at our time limit, if not over. Should we go turn it back to you?
Yes, I think it's time for our breakout rooms, but thank you both for sharing your experience. And one thing that I've often said to Sarah is just, I love the way her brain works, how she thinks, and just love hearing the examples that John has to share. So just that wisdom and experience. Thank you. All right, so we're going to go into breakout rooms for about 15 minutes. And you'll find about 4 people in your breakout room. And we really want you to use this opportunity to answer the question, what is one thing that has held you back as a leader? What is one way you want to reimagine leadership going forward? And I loved how everyone was commenting in the chat as well, how this resonated. And I just know there's going to be great conversation in there. So just take time to share with each of you, make sure all voices are heard within that time. And then if you've got some extra capacity at the end, maybe just see if there's some themes that come up within those groups, and we'd love to hear those themes when you come back. So you'll be whisked away. Enjoy. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had some great discussions in your breakouts. And as usual, I'm sure it was too short, especially with those questions. We needed like an evening supper, all of us around a table. Sarah was describing in our breakout room of where she held something and it was around dinner tables. And I was like, how amazing would that be if we were all able to sit around a table together? But yeah, we would love to hear some themes that came up in your breakouts. We'd love you to just share in the chat. Yeah, just any themes or insights you want to share with the group. Since we couldn't have an ear in every room and we want to know what's going on. Now we've got some hands up here. Maybe I'll call on Sarah and John, how we want to coordinate. We would like people to share in the chat. I know we don't have too much time. So if you could share maybe in the chat first, just for the sake of time. perhaps you're still going through your mind, trying to process what you went through in the chat as well, or in the breakout rooms.
Sarah, why don't you facilitate? I'm afraid my internet is a little wobbly.
No worries. No worries. I'm just looking at the chat. So I see exploring the potential of each participant. The opportunity for continuing dialogue would be great. I agree. We were actually just talking about this in our breakout group, about the fact that there is no path to regenerative leadership without being willing to be vulnerable, without being willing to be authentic and address what is, look at the conditions that have been created, and to work on that with other people, because this work is not really being done on broad scale yet. It's still emerging. And so I highly recommend that on your journey that you choose to surround yourself with other people who are trying to think this way and approach leadership in this kind of way, because I believe the hardest part about trying to be a regenerative leader is the fact that we are doing this in an environment that's largely mechanistic. So we're combating all these patterns, habits, the ways other people are behaving, and the expectations of others in that system. So continuing the dialogue is important. Thank you for that. Such good insights. John, he's frozen. I was going to ask him about on his journey, how he continued to just saturate himself with new thinking and new ideas. I'm sure that if he had stable internet, he'd be able to tell us a lot of stories, but continuing to reassess our thinking is going to be a huge part. John, can we hear you?
Yeah, I hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't want to occupy too much of this little limited space we have left, but I think the one thing that comes up in response to that question is a little off your question, but I'm reminded of Dana Meadows' Places to Intervene in a System, and I think this relates to this paradigm shift. She wrote that the most important thing is to be able to let go of paradigms, and what I have found is that for some reason that has been easy for me to do, but that's quite different than most people in positions of power and importance in business, because they identify with their success, and it's not that they're not smart enough, it's that they literally can't allow themselves to see a different paradigm. So this shift from mechanistic thinking to holistic thinking, and then applying that to leadership, we just cannot underestimate how challenging this is and how important it is that we, in a sense, practice. It's like a muscle that we have to train. So that's what comes up for me. Absolutely.
I could not agree more. And this comment in the chat about how much we need self-compassion towards ourselves, I want to just highlight, because this kind of a journey takes time. We will inevitably do something mechanistic on a regular basis. In fact, it's very often, even if I'm teaching a regenerative leadership course, that I'll say something mechanistic and I'll laugh at myself saying, oh, there it is. It just kind of rolls out of our tongues sometimes. And that's okay. It's all right to just acknowledge and say, I think the way I just approached that is coming from an approach I don't want to bring. Let's look at this together and see how we might bring another approach for us, because I want each of you to be able to bring your potential to the organization. And I think that level of honesty and openness is what cracks open the hope in people that, wait, my environment could change. I think we're at time, Rachel. We'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Been such great reflections in the chat, so thank you. I know this takes time to process and type out, so thank you for sharing those. Before we close out, I just wanted to call out our leadership program at nRhythm that starts next week, and this was really a taster of what this program will hold. So you got one hour slot with a quick little 20-minute breakout or 15 minutes. And we hold a 6-week course that starts on the 16th of May. And it's really about deep diving into what this little mini workshop was today. So we'd really just invite you to sign up there and come join us. Sarah will be leading it. As you can see, she has so much wisdom, energy, and just an amazing mind to be able to share with everyone how you think through the role of leader or leadership. So that's happening. And then we're also going to send out a tool, which is to support creating conditions. You'll receive that in email. So keep checking those emails. We also wanted to call out Laura Storm. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about her. She has a program as well that's a leadership program that's a year. It runs for a year and it starts in October, as well as a leadership book. If you haven't seen her book, I haven't read it yet, but I believe it's amazing. So get your hands on her book as well. And then something else that came up also as a theme just through the chat is community or finding like-minded people. And I wanted to invite people to just engage with the community that's around you. If they're people in person that are like-minded that you can wrestle through these questions with, or perhaps you can find that on the nRhythm community or the Capital Institute community. Find those people, even if it's 1 or 2, set up some structures or whatever will work for you to be able to find that space of how do we work through this together. Because I think everyone has really voiced it's not about doing it by yourself and how do you learn from others. So just encourage you to jump into those communities as well. And I think that's it. Thank you everyone for joining today. Sarah, John, any last words? We're right on time. All right.
Go ahead, Sarah.
That's it. We're done.
I think we're done. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess my
Bye.
last word would
Thank
be,
you.
don't forget to create conditions.
Have a great day.
Bye.